deciding whether to talk about online asynchronous learning for coaches who've completed training and who are doing professional development, and also for non-coaches who are looking to learn something, might be around leadership or whatever. And the other topic which you brought up was emergent conversations. And I'm more energized by your one, but I can also see there's an inherent link between the two, in that there's not an emergent conversation in any opportunity for an emergent conversation in online asynchronous learning.
Yeah, thanks for that. So should we start with the emergent conversation, and then as we see the links coming up with the asynchronous learning, name them?
Yeah, and I don't even feel the need to necessarily go into the online learning, but if it comes up, I'm happy to.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what do we mean when we talk about an emergent conversation?
So you brought the topic up. How did you see it?
Yeah, so it's been on front of mind for many weeks now, consistently, and over the years it's popped up many times, and specifically it's in my work as a coach supervisor, and also a mentor coach. And it's been originally, when it first started coming up, was this battle of trying to do what originally I was trained to do technically correct in those work in my practice is contracting, and then often seeing that when there is an emergent conversation, some really magical things can come up. And in coach supervision, we often, the work, a large part of the work is to find out what the key issue is of the presenting topic. So what's the underlying golden thread of the topic that's showing up? And I find that more often than not, when there's an emergent conversation, that golden thread comes up almost more easily without any, there's almost less gremlins and sticky stuff that comes up with it, and it's a bit easier to work with it. And often it's surprising for both my client and for myself. Like, oh, that's what the key issue is here. So it's been this. Originally, it was this sort of tangle of, but I was trained to do contracting, and yet there's this other thing. And what I'm holding for myself these days is the phrase "contact before contract," and allowing that contact space is often where an emergent conversation starts to come from. At least that's what I see in my practice.
Yeah, I understand emergent conversations in the same way as what you've described. And a couple of things came up now when you were diving into that. So emergent conversations seem to be distinct from conversations which rely on the technicalities of the modality, whether it's coaching or supervision. And then I was thinking, whether they are mutually exclusive of the technicalities. So you're smiling, so maybe that crossed your mind too. And I think a word which, or a phrase which describes the relationship but the distinction at the same time is emergent conversations transcend the technical aspects of the modality, or the technicalities of the work. So there's a letting go of some aspect of process, whether that process is a coaching framework or a coaching competency, like contracting, and a framework being any kind of recognized coaching process. But it's useful to, or that process or competency can still come in useful. So it's not letting go, or it's not abandoning for good. Maybe using it as a guide. I'm not sure. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I'm currently in a time of working with quite a few mental coaching clients, doing observations, which I know you are as well. And I noticed that my what I'm saying quite often, and this has been actually quite cool because I'm saying it quite often, both to myself as a practitioner and also to the people that I'm working with, is know the framework of a contract, and then be challenged in the moment to play with like here and now appropriate language. So I like what you're saying about it being a guide, rather than it's very tempting for it to become a tick box. And when it becomes a tick box, that's when you're falling back into the technicalities side. Whereas when it's a guide, it's part of a process rather than, like creating the starting block for something to happen. It is, something is already happening.
So the emergent conversation, let me know if I hear you right. The emergent conversation provides the context for the process.
I'm not too sure. Maybe. It's funny because my first thought reaction was no, that's not quite it. But then when I had a look at it again, I thought, wait, no, that could be it.
What are your reasons for both?
I think it was the word context tripped me up a bit. And so emergent conversation creates the context for a process to happen. I think that's something like what you said. So when you say the context, is that like the environment or the the space?
Yes, and so there's stuff happening in that space in the here and now. There are modes of each participant in the conversation is engaging that conversation in a mode. And those modes either set up, invite, or create a dynamic. And that's happening in the space. But there's also contextual information about these, when I say context, I mean things like facts about each of the conversation partners, backgrounds, experiences, circumstances.
Okay.
And more.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like a bit of a melting pot where, yeah, I like that. Yeah.
So I think that without that stuff, some of which I think is more important than others, the engagement is going to be quite transactional. So this is something, it has the potential to go off on a tangent, but I think it illustrates the concept well, so I'll just name it. When you engage with a coaching chatbot, it asks you questions about what it is that you want to focus on, and it engages with you very generically. So the questions are about, do you know what the action steps are? Do you know what resources you need? Do you have those resources? What are your timelines? These are all questions which are process oriented. So they follow the process of a specific coaching model, and they will, in the case of a chatbot, feign competencies. And as I say that, I'm wondering if you're doing really technical coaching, if you're feigning competencies too, even as a human being. But anyway, that's a tangent. So when the conversation with a chatbot happens, it's about externalities and circumstances and generic concepts which one can apply to resolving something. But in an emergent conversation, when both conversational partners can reflect on the modes that they're engaging each other in and the dynamic between them and how that's related to the challenge that the client's experiencing, that's transcending. Although that is a modality of sorts, it's transcending the conventional understanding of what a modality is and what the competencies are. And and then those aspects of the context which I think are not necessarily important aren't necessarily the focus. The here and now subjective experiences of the participants are the focus. And that gives really relevant context and information. So it's trying to, while I'm describing this, think of a metaphor that would really illustrate it well. And it might be like an onion, layers of an onion. And you go into the core and look at what's happening there. But then the outside layers are something you can zoom back out to and have a look at, okay, so what is the, maybe like, what is the shape and size of that core? Or how does the shape and size of that core influence the shape and size of the overall onion? So how does what's playing out in the here and now of our conversation relate back to the practical challenge you're looking to resolve, or relate back to an organizational theme or an environmental context?
Yeah. So that opportunity to share information from the client, which is potentially giving data about the context, the scenario that they're coming from, is a vehicle to demonstrate deeper stuff. Like a really generic example that came to mind was somebody complaining about a coworker, and what would be quite telling is the mode in which they complain, rather than the fact that they're complaining about somebody and what the somebody did, which could start to be quite telling about what their beliefs and value structure is about. The client's beliefs and value structure is about. Whereas if we're stuck in a very technical approach, so what's your coaching topic for today, might strip away the energy or the more telling information. So somebody could quite easily, in a flat, unenergetic way, saying, I'm having trouble with a coworker, which is far less enlightening than somebody having maybe a bit of a dramatic vent about a coworker. As I say that, I feel like it's like, well, this is like a no-brainer. So, but why is this such an important conversation?
I have some ideas.
I lost you for a moment. I heard you say, I have some ideas, and then?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. So what immediately comes to my mind is the experience of coming out of coach training or coach supervision training, and having a strong technical sense of what right coaching or right supervision looks like, and then that angst of going, but hang on, when I deviate from the right way, so much more richness comes in. And how do I start to bring together my experience and my theoretical knowledge? And there's something there about my own, but I do see this quite often in my clients. There's something about the be perfect drivers kick in, or please others drivers kick in, and it makes it difficult for them to start to bring together that, allowing an emergent conversation and having the technicalities as a guide to hold that conversation. There's a big thing about permission. So having these kinds of conversations is a way of creating permission. That's what comes to my mind.
Okay.
How about you?
Before I say what I'm thinking, can you expand on the permission bit?
Yeah. So when I say permission, I'm thinking of transactional analysis, and permissions being an antidote to some of the negative messages that each one of us has taken in our journey of getting to where we are now. So earlier I said about a be perfect style or driver, or a please others driver, and there could be a myriad versions of don't messages or negative messages that come around that force somebody to go into unhelpful behaviors to fulfill that. And a permission is an antidote to those don't or negative messages. So it takes the fear or the danger out of it and creates an opportunity to move forward and grow.
Yeah, and questions about resources and timelines and outcomes are in a different paradigm to the conversation around everything associated with permissions.
Yeah.
So my ideas are, I think, more generic than yours. It's about something that people who come to other people to work on something, experiencing a similar struggle, regardless of whether they coaching clients or supervision clients. And often there's a focus on a superficial layer of the challenge. And that in coaching, that layer is usually the outcome to aim for. Maybe that's not true. It's sometimes the outcome. Like, I don't want this to happen. I want to avoid X. Or even I want to achieve Y. Sometimes and actually I think this is more often the case. In coaching, the client doesn't necessarily know what it is that they want, even know what the topic is, but they know what the pain is, they know what the suffering is, and they want to avoid that. And there's a one-dimensional or surface layer focus on that, as opposed to all the psychological stuff that's happening in response to the pain point, or which brings the pain point about. So people's modes of problem solving, almost by definition, haven't worked by the time they come to somebody to help them experience change. Because if they had worked, they wouldn't be there. And I think I need to be more specific. Their mode of problem solving in relation to the specific challenge at that specific moment in time.
Yeah.
Because those modes might work for other circumstances, and they may have worked in the past.
Yeah.
And often that's where the problem lies. So if the practitioner uses a transactional approach in engaging with the client's very likely to use that exact same problem solving mode in that conversation and outside of that conversation going forward. But in an emergent conversation, the practitioner and also the client at an appropriate stage will be able to reflect on what the problem solving mode is that doesn't work and transform that, both inherently and explicitly. So inherently by creating a shift, an inner shift in being, which is harder to define, and explicitly by naming the new awareness or the new way of thinking, the new values, the new beliefs, and the actions to follow to create an alternate outcome, a desired outcome. And that, I don't think stand under correction, but that very likely doesn't happen outside of a relationship, meaning more than one person. So I think it's important to have the conversation about working in the here and now and emergent conversations, because this isn't something that people can do on their own. And it yields sustainable and results in contrast with a process approach or a transactional conversation. So the emergent conversations also name the elephant in the room. like when the client is struggling to stay on track in their thought or to express different parts of themselves or to use different resources within themselves. So cognitive resources, emotional resources, and somatic resources. Those are things which can only be named through experiencing their struggle in an emergent conversation.
And what I'm thinking about, what that triggers me to think about, is the thinking about the ICF's competency framework, and they're in a process of change now, shifting from one competency framework to a new one. But in the past, with the old one, there had been many renditions of expanding what does it mean to demonstrate at different levels of competence. And when you put the first level of a credential in contrast to the top level of credential and what they're looking at, how it gets demonstrated, you'll see far more descriptions of nuanced emergent discussion coming from that master credential coach. Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting that at least to my eyes is only clearly apparent to be assessed or looked at master level. But my experience is that it isn't ring fenced for master level. It can happen at any level of competence. So even just stepping away from the ICF credentialing framework, because there's a human element. So it is human.
I do acknowledge the usefulness of nuanced descriptions of what practitioners would be doing at different levels of mastery. But I wrote an article about the limitations of that. I think it's called Coaching Behavioral Standards Are Overemphasized. And my problem, but maybe it's more a limitation of behavioral standards, is that they're about behaviors by definition. And that's a different paradigm to what's going on in the dynamic between people in a relationship and the psyche of the individuals. So that stuff, the psychology of a relationship, is not acknowledged in a behavioral paradigm, I would argue. The new set of competencies gets one step closer to doing that. Talking about having a coaching mindset, talking about intuition, all the old competencies talked about intuition as well. The new competencies talking about professional development, which I think infers supervision.
Yeah.
Even though it's not named for some very interesting reason. It's almost taboo.
And trying to please all the nations.
Yeah. So I think the usefulness of behavioral standards is they also provide a reference point for assessing competence. Which, in the context of a professional body, is, well, and for the purposes of the safety and quality of all the target markets, so clients, colleagues, the industry, practitioners themselves, is a necessity. But it is in such a different paradigm that Emergent Conversations isn't named, or the aspects of Emergent Conversations aren't named. So I don't like to use the competencies, regardless of how nuanced the descriptions are for different levels of proficiency, as a reference point in reflecting on emergent conversations, which is what happens in supervision.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, because when it's what I referred to earlier, when it's only barely touched on in master level, it kind of makes it feel, I don't have to be doing it, or I can't be doing it unless I'm at master, which is ridiculous. Because it's not about being a master at something, it's being able to be with.
If you are able to simultaneously hold a behavioral framework and a psychological framework, then you're able to transition between the two paradigms, and the restriction doesn't necessarily apply there.
Yeah, so they move into being it's what we were saying earlier about, to only focus on them, they become a tick box, which is mechanistic and limiting. Whereas when you, like you brought in there, bringing balancing it between the two frameworks, enables something far more engaging and potentiating transformation.
You missed the last word you said.
Potentiating transformation.
Oh, yeah. And this is probably going off on a tangent from Emergent Conversations. That seems okay to do. I see this as important in training and continuous professional development, to be able to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, and also to contract around what perspectives the practitioner is using. So to be clear about their philosophy and their frameworks, even their values. So then I think the importance of that is trainees, if they're not aware of their trainers' philosophies and all that other stuff can grow up believing that the paradigm in which they've been trained is the ultimate truth. And I think that's restrictive professionally and personally. So a behavioral paradigm, I think by many social scientists, is seen as an ultimate truth. But there are many other paradigms of looking at people in the world. And not only do I see no harm in doing that, but I see amazing benefit in doing that.
This what's come to whispered in my ear a couple of times in this last few minutes was in coach training, engaging in a journey of becoming a coach rather than learning to do coaching. And when I get to work with a collection of people learning to become a coach, I love those moments when the connections happen of them starting to step into their own flavor of being a coach. So the objective isn't to come out the end of a training and have carbon copies of each other doing the same technical skill. So creating the environment to enable that journey. Parts of that journey is a lot of self-work and experimenting and playing with technicalities to enable hopefully an emergent process.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think there's a nuanced difference in wanting carbon copies versus having a minimum standard of competence. And I think there are probably other things that stand in relation to each other in that context. It doesn't even bother me that people will coach in different styles. I think that's inevitable because individuals are unique. They'll each have their own psyche. But I think there's a responsibility to ensure that people are going to influence other people's lives, do so safely and also effectively. It's an ethical responsibility.
Yeah, and an ongoing one. When I say ongoing, it's what I specifically meant was it's an ongoing process to keep it in mind that it's evolving and changing. So you can't just say, "Oh, I've got that down, I've got that sorted," and not look at it again.
It's like enlightenment. When you think you've got it, then that's an indication you haven't got it.
Yeah.
Well, my experience and the experience of many of my own supervisees and colleagues is that there are layers to core issues. When you think you've got it resolved, it's going to show up in a slightly different way, or in a way which you haven't yet become aware of. And there are so many different core issues as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And circumstances in which there are no clear solutions.
Yeah, I'm thinking again that's where the power of an emergent conversation is, because when there's no clear solutions, you need the space to let things come out and grapple and apply your mind in different contexts and share with somebody. This is the magic of working with a coach or a coach supervisor. Keep an eye on our time. What do you want to say to bring us to a close from your side?
Please like our video and share it and subscribe to our channel. It helps us continue to do this and engage with people on these subjects.
Yeah, and share with us your ideas, your thoughts, your challenges. Help us expand our own thinking and emerging conversations. Thank you.
Ciao.